Hello, everybody again. It's time for session 2. Sorry to interrupt. I'm certain great networking that's been going on in the main arena for the conference. Without further ado, we've got an action-packed session 2 with Alastair Wilson, Dionne Williams and Karen Leigh Anderson. And they're going to talk about So You Want to Grow, but how? And they're going to talk particularly about kind of mindset that you need to embrace. I'm going to hand over to Heidi Fisher, who's going to chair this session. Thanks very much.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to session 2. I'm delighted to be here. We are going to be looking at You Want to Grow, but how? Obviously, over the past year, we've faced a lot of challenges. COVID has required all of us to think about how we can deliver, and we've had to make huge changes in that period. But it's also been a time for us to think about opportunities for growth that the current climate presents, because history has shown us that more social enterprises are set up and grow in turbulent times. So we are going to be hearing from this amazing panel of 3 guests, so Alastair, Dionne and Karen, about the different approaches to growth they've experienced and observed within social enterprises, and also whether mindset is important or not. So mindset obviously is one of those things that some people say it matters, other people say it doesn't. So I'm really looking forward to hearing from the panelists. The format for the session is that each panelist has 8 minutes to present their ideas, and then that will be followed by a Q&A. So please do pop your questions into the Q&A section and we will pick those up later on in the presentation. So I'm going to hand over now to Alastair. He's going to be the first person to present. Thank you.
Thank you, Heidi. I've always been intrigued as to how many Brummies I could fit into my bedroom, and it turns out it's 36. So you're very welcome, all of you. Yeah, so thanks, Heidi. We're here to kind of work out growth, and that's a weird proposition given the pandemic and what we've all been through. What I think I'd like to start by doing is acknowledging that many social entrepreneurs and social enterprises actively choose to trade in broken markets. So it doesn't matter whether people are choosing to set out their stall on a deprived housing estate or whether they're looking to create jobs for homeless people. It's hardly either of those options are hardly the most lucrative hunting ground for traded revenues. And I think we need to acknowledge that. We need to acknowledge that social enterprises and social entrepreneurs need this kind of ludicrously agile, innovative, creative mindset in order to try and get this model to stack up with a proposition that nobody in their right mind setting up a commercial business would pursue. And you know, over the many years, over 20 years odd that I've been at the School for Social Entrepreneurs, what I have noticed is that there's a well-trodden path that some of the more kind of genius social entrepreneurs have followed in terms of unearthing a way to trade in a broken market. And it roughly goes like this. What they do is they use trusts and foundations to kind of establish the efficacy of their model. So in other words, they might get a small grant from the likes of Esme Fairbairn or whatever to set up their idea, prove it, and then using the evidence of what they've achieved, they then flip from fundraising for their inputs to selling their outputs. And what they have to do is find a proxy market who's willing to buy those outputs. So it's probably easier if I give you an example. So I'm thinking of a chap called Joel Davis, who set up Tutors United. And Tutors United, I mean, really inspired by his own childhood, where he was a free school meals kid. And And he was tutored by his then uncle and achieved good grades in maths and English, and just saw the fantastic opportunity to upskill kids in that area. So his social enterprise proposition was tutoring for kids on free school meals. Now that's a truly broken market, isn't it? I mean, who's going to have the money to pay for a private tutor if you're on free school meals? So he tested it out. He proved how effective it was. He used grant funding to do that. And then he unearthed his proxy market. And his proxy market was schools and housing associations, bizarrely. And so he managed to land his first housing association, really with the proposition that educational attainment would lead to a reduction in crime on estates. It would also lead to greater employment and greater salaries, and therefore it would, in the long term, protect the rents of the housing association. Now, you might think, well, that's a complex argument to construct. I'm surprised the housing association went for it, but they did. And he tracked the evidence very carefully. And then he jumped from one housing association to another, to another, to another. And now thousands of children get Tutors United free tutors, and it's paid for by housing associations, which he renews their contracts year after year after year, because it makes sense for them. It makes sense for their business. He now has contracts with 14 major housing associations throughout the UK. So this notion of fundraising for your inputs, so in other words, the tutors that were being paid, and then flipping that to selling your outputs to a proxy market, the proxy market in his case being housing associations, is a pretty well trodden track that I have seen with, I would say, hundreds of social entrepreneurs over many, many years at the School for Social Entrepreneurs. So the other thing to kind of acknowledge about that story really is that Joel did need grant funding in order to prove the model in the first instance. But then he goes on to need grant funding to run alongside his traded model on an ongoing basis. So he has a lot of trusts and foundations that fund him. They're in the minority compared with the housing associations that give him contracts. And of course, when he follows the traded route with housing associations and contracts, of course, he's in charge of the pricing, he's in charge of the margins, therefore he can build up reserves, therefore he's got a route for growth. Whereas if he was entirely reliant on the trusts and foundations and the grants, there'd be a real glass ceiling on that and he couldn't grow his business. So, but he does need to lever in grant funding. And that's annoying for him, and it's annoying for social enterprises because they've got to master two games and they've got a dual focus, and they've got to be a kind of master charity chief exec, fundraising, and they've got to be a master business leader, trading and selling contracts and winning business. And that's extremely difficult to retain that dual focus. Now, we at the School for Social Entrepreneurs, we've doled out about 15 million in grant funding to social enterprises over the years. And we were really, we felt annoyed and guilty that we were part of the problem of the way that grant funders view social enterprises. They, to a certain extent, treat them in the same way as charities. In other words, the charities have got to fill out an application, explain the impact they're going to have, et cetera, et cetera. But we knew that our social entrepreneurs had trading ambitions and wanted to pursue traded sustainable impact models. So we thought, is there a way that we could reinvent the necessary medicine of giving grant? We understand that social enterprises need to lever in grant if they're working in a broken market, but we wanted to reinvent that in a way that was congruent with their trading ambitions. So we set up something called match trading, and match trading works like this. So we basically look at your accounts for the previous year. We separate it out into traded income and grant income. We set your grant income aside, and we say to you, with your traded income, for every pound you traded last year, any pound that you trade above and beyond that in this forthcoming year, we will match you pound for pound. And it's called match trading And let me see, I'm just getting a chat thing. I'm seeing if somebody's telling me I'm out of time. No, I'm not yet. So it's called match trading. And what that does is effectively it's nudge economics. So it effectively says to, you know, if it's Dionne with Dionne's outfit, which you'll hear about in a minute, it says to Dionne, go for it. You're building your business and you're building sustainable contracts, and we're right with you every step of the way. And for every pound you lump onto your traded income next year, we'll match you pound for pound in grant income. And what it does is it indemnifies Dionne working in poorer communities, more hard to reach neighbourhoods, and ensures that she can go on continuing to grow that business in a more sustainable way and doesn't have to kind of flip backwards and forwards from having huge slugs of grant funding that fall off the edge of a cliff and then trying to chase a sustainable business at the same time. It tries to get grant funding to work in lockstep with, you know, Dionne's trading ambitions for her business. So it's called match trading, guys. Have a look. There's a match trading task force who are behind it, which is about 20 funders in the UK. And to my mind, it's opening up an intriguing new sector. If you think about it like this, in the old days, we had the grant funding sector, you know, kind of traditional.
That's your time up. I'm sorry, Alastair. I'm going to be really strict here.
Quite right, Heidi. Yeah. Thank you very much.
You could probably talk about match trading and the concept of it and how it works for the whole of the day. So if anyone does want to chat with Alastair, I'm sure he's going to be around during the networking break. So do hop onto the table with him. But we're going to head over to Dionne now, if that's okay.
Thank you.
Thanks, Alastair. Thank you, Heidi. So, yes, my name is Dionne Williams. I'm the Managing Director of Forward Carers, and we are a social enterprise and also a community interest company. And we provide a range of services in the health and social care market. So I'm just going to take Alastair's term of broken market. And if there's any market that's broken at the moment, I think it's certainly the health and social care sector, which we're trying to navigate at the moment. And obviously with the recent pandemic has been really, really challenging. And I think really as a social enterprise, what the last 12 months has demonstrated to us, the sector, but also more importantly, to public sector and other sectors, is that actually when it comes to responding quickly, when it comes to responding creatively, the social enterprise sector can really achieve and deliver that. And certainly what we saw when large organisations and public sector organisations in the early days of the pandemic really struggled to get to grips or to really find an alternative way of delivering services, we saw that organisations like ourselves were there, ready, and in a much better position to diversify and be more creative in terms of the way we delivered services to our customers. So our customers are family carers. So we support people that care for a loved one who's got an illness, disability, or an illness. And as you can imagine, the last 12 months has been very, very difficult for our customers. And so we've really had to think really creatively how we've responded to that. And that's provided real opportunities for us. So obviously the pandemic has been really difficult, but actually it's provided an opportunity for us as an organisation to think differently and offer different and more innovative solutions to how we meet the needs of our customers. And I think what we've actually found is that some of those ways of, hybrid of delivering services online, we will continue to do that even beyond the pandemic. Now, I think the recent Social Care Act changes, Social Value Act changes in public sector commissioning really is an opportunity for us as social enterprises, but it doesn't always sit comfortably with the sector, with statutory duties and budgets to balance. Now, I'm speaking here as a former public sector commissioner, that it isn't difficult, and sometimes it's very difficult not to look at the bottom line of a cost of a contract when you're commissioning services. But I think it's really important as social enterprises is that we're able to demonstrate the added value, the additional benefits that come out of contracting with a social enterprise, over and beyond the bottom line, the cost of the contract. And we'd heard in the previous segment earlier this morning demonstrated that added value. And yes, it might be a little bit more expensive in the beginning to contract with a social enterprise, but fundamentally, usually in the long term, there are real gains and benefits and savings for public sector. And just to give you an example of Forward Carers, we use a social value tool to be able to demonstrate and evidence that. So we were able to calculate for every £1 that was invested in our service, actually was around a £6 saving to the social care system. Now, when you're able to put that back to commissioners, back to contracting authorities with that evidence base, it's really difficult for them to be able to argue with that. One of the other things I'd be talking about in terms of growth is looking at it and don't necessarily there's opportunities to come to you. So if you've got a market or you've got customers who are coming to you, do you offer this? And your current answer is no. Well, are there opportunities for you to be moving into that sector? And I think this is kind of going back to what Alastair was talking about in terms of, for us, certainly looking at diversifying our income streams. And, you know, as an organisation, we've been in a position where we have the majority of our funding has been through public sector contracts. But we know the situation in the public sector at the moment, and it's really risky for us to continue to do that. So we've added additional offers, additional services, some of which now that customers can purchase now at the point of access, and really tapped into using or finding other income streams to really, I suppose, ensure that our service and our organisation is sustainable. And I think this is the issue, I think, for some public sector organisations or commissioning authorities. There is this assumption that potentially social or enterprises or, non-profits are in a way a little bit more flaky for some reason than other types of organisations. And hopefully I would argue that is simply not the case. And actually, if we've got the right business case, if we've got the right evidence, and we've got all the appropriate audit tools in place, we should be able to demonstrate that we are as robust as organisation as any other organisation, whether that be profit making or a private company or whatever else. So I think it's really important that, yes, the crux of what we do is serving our communities, adding value, really thinking about and reinvesting back into communities and the wider economics and social value in terms of our environment. But it's still, at the end of the day, we are businesses, and I think it's really important that we're able to demonstrate that. Final point before I hand over to Karen, and we heard again in the morning segment, was about the strength of collaboration. And I think certainly as an organisation that leads a delivery partnership of over 20 organisations, we've seen the real benefits of that. And we're contracting with organisations that would never have been able to compete for public sector contracts in their own right, but have a fantastic offer for customers. And so by working in collaboration in a consortium or partnership arrangement, not only brings benefits to those small organisations, but actually also allows organisations like public sectors to be able to reach communities that traditionally they've been able to struggle. And we've certainly seen that through our local arrangements with our 20 organisations. We've been able to reach communities that these services traditionally struggle to achieve and reach. As far as we're concerned, there are no hard to reach communities, there are no hidden communities. It's just about how you go about finding them. I think that's me, and I think I'm going to hand over to Karen at this stage. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks very much, Dionne. I am so delighted to be talking about growth, about how my work is done in startups, and it has been that way for about 2 decades now. Currently, I've been working part-time at the University of Cambridge at the Judge Business School, at an incubator program that only works with social ventures. But alongside that, I've worked with ventures that are scaling. But my career started with big firms. In the early 90s, I worked for IBM, Oracle, Investec Bank, Grant Thornton, Ernst & Winnie, before it became Ernst & Young and then EY. And so I've seen scale. And I never wanted to be part of a corporate. And I ended up in the dot-com boom in London, and that was crazy. And I was working with tech startups and venture capitalists, and they sent me to Cambridge. And that's when I found social enterprise, and I found my niche because I really believe in business to create change. And when I say that, I mean an asset-locked social enterprise, a social enterprise that has the governance to make sure it's a social enterprise. I'm not messing around in the social business space. But since then, I've always worked with startups and growth. And I've worked in social franchising since 2004. I've worked with business acquisition, where I've worked with third sector organizations buying profitable private businesses, mergers, social investment, business angels. And in 2018, I got to go to the States and look at a social enterprise that has been around for more than 100 years, has delivered more than 20 million jobs. It's reached every year, it reaches way more than that, but it's actually delivered that number of jobs. Their turnover is $6 billion. And I did that as a Churchill Fellow for Enterprise. And the reason for that was to know how the US did scale in social enterprise. And I went back to my roots, because my roots in social enterprise are social firms. So when we talk about broken markets, social firms operate in that, or work integration social enterprises. They employ people who no one else wants to employ. And so I wanted to find a social enterprise in the US that did that. And not only did that, because there are a lot, like the Salvation Army, that do the employability, but they do it with a grant-based approach. I wanted a revenue-driven social enterprise that created that change. And it was, weirdly enough, at a staff meeting at the business school, I was sitting next to an American, and I went, well, you're American, I'm going to America next year. Where do I find a social enterprise that does this at scale? And he told me about Goodwill Industries International. And into the US, I didn't know a Goodwill shop, which is a charity shop. But for us from the UK, going to the US to see how they do charity shops, it's like nothing we've ever seen before. They have drive-in delivery schemes for you to hand over your charity goods. But even then, it's different, because when I looked at their model, they started with trade. From the very beginning in 1902, they paid people wages, people who no one else wanted to pay, by making money by selling things that nobody else wanted and donated to them. And so what I have seen is it is possible to grow without grants. Yes, they had grants in terms of time. Loads of people volunteered, and they delivered it initially within a church-based structure, but by the 1930s, Goodwill was an independent entity outside that. And what I found so amazing was talking to the 5 generations of CEOs run the various, there's about 150 organizations that are part of this group, with more than 250 stores, and they do other things. They don't just do the charity stores. They do what you were saying, Dionne, which is they are embedded in the community. So at the heart of their governance of each entity is people embedded in community. And they say, what does the community need? We know people always need jobs, and we know they always need training, but what else? So do we fundraise for a huge building because we have the capacity to fundraise because we're so huge, and then we bring people in? Or do we join someone else who's delivering a credit union? Or sometimes they're part of GP surgeries. So and the times that they're all failed, because for 118 years there have been failures, it's when they haven't been community engaged at a board level, which meant their CEO that they appointed was not community engaged at a board level, which meant their staff weren't. And because they weren't community engaged, they weren't able to actually generate income and revenue and donations, and nobody wanted to be employed by them. So at the heart of it, there's this issue of community engagement. But when we're thinking about mindset, what I was reminded of when I looked at the founder of Goodwill, who happened to be a reverend, but he had been a journalist before. And I think that's the secret of his success, because everything down. And so that's why I was meeting CEOs 5 generations down from him. And so not only is this organization huge, not only is it driven, at the moment they earn 95% of their income through trade. So they top it up. And I always think if you can top it up with grants, brilliant. But they also have never left their mission. And they did that because the founder was incredibly clear about what he wanted to achieve. He wanted to change the lives of the people who at that stage were refugees in Boston who had nothing. And he started by saying, I'll give them something. And the people say, we don't want you to give us something. If you're going to give us anything, give us a job. And so he said, I want to create jobs and I want to have enough money in my income to do that. And because he did that and because he wrote it down and because he told lots of people, I had him quoted to me time and time again by the many CEOs and presidents that I spoke to within the group. So I think starting with the end in mind is how you get growth. And I have a little slide that I love to share with entrepreneurs, and I call it my legacy slide. So I'm going to try and share screen. We didn't practice this, but let's see if I can choose what to share. Window, this one, share. Can everyone see it? I can't see you, so I don't know. Okay, so the legacy questions are, where do you want to go? And how will you know when you've got there? And this is very different from starting with, what is my theory of change? And I'll give a really down-to-earth example of that. One of the people I work with, who's actually still a sole trader, who might never become incorporated as a social enterprise, but I love the impact she's having, which is helping people with therapy around migraines. Is someone pinging at me? Can you see? Someone speak to me, take their microphone off and tell me that you can see. So this person helps people with therapy to stop migraines. You would say, well, what's the impact she wants to make? Stop migraines. That's not the impact she wants to make. She wants to change the language around therapy and treatment of patients, where people medicalize things and come and use language that is not empowering and is not helpful and is not scientific in this area. And only when I asked her this question did she say, yeah, I don't just want to stop people suffering. I actually want to change the system. And I know most social entrepreneurs want to change the system. And I think the problem is when we are in startup mode, we see an issue and we're trying to fix that issue that's right in front of us. And after working with about 1,500 social entrepreneurs, I know how hard it is for social entrepreneurs to bring their heads up and say, so real change I want to make? What is the world I want to see? And how will I know when I've got there? And then you need to say, what are the resources I need? And then you need to think about what form of growth you want, which is, who do you want to join you and what relationship do you want to have with fellow travelers? Because there are many different ways of growing. You can joint venture. You can run consortiums like Dionne has. You can have organic growth like Joel in the example Alastair had. You can do franchising. You can do replication. You can buy businesses. You can create subsidiaries, do a hybrid of all of those, mix it all up. What's key at that is you have to know the change you're trying to make. You have to know from the beginning where you're going. You have to know what's negotiable. You have to know what your limits and boundaries are. So there will be some things that it doesn't matter how much someone pays you, you will never give it up. You will always do it. And knowing that and then protecting it as you grow is key. So now I'm trying to get out of this.
Thank you, Karen. That was brilliant. Thank you, Dionne and Alastair. That was really interesting to hear your different perspectives around growing a social enterprise. I'm going to now move us into the discussion part. And I thought the first question that I'm going to put out to the three of you is, why is the conversation about growth so important for social enterprises? Because I think this is something that comes up time and time again is, should we actually be encouraging social enterprises to grow? Does it actually really matter? And why are we always talking about growing social enterprises? So does anyone want to take that as the first question? You're looking very shy and nervous.
Happy to start. Working at a business school, obviously I have an opinion on this. I think the problem is not talking about scale and growth for the sake of scale and growth. It's talking about what is the appropriate response to the problems we have. And I love working with hyperlocal, deep impact social entrepreneurs who are very clear that their growth is going to go deep and highly embedded in their community. And equally, there are some people who have that vision that they want to have a systemic worldwide change. So I think, again, it starts with the entrepreneur. What is it the change you want to make? And then lead with that and prepare yourself for that type of growth, because you have the same building blocks for deep growth as wide growth, but actually you need to plan it.
Can I come in there at this point, Heidi? I mean, I completely agree with Karen. If we look at the growth that we've had, it's, as Karen said, it's been responding to something. It hasn't been for the sake of it. So our partnership has grown because there's been a need or a gap that we've wanted to achieve or an objective, an outcome we've wanted to identify. And I talked previously in terms of our partnership around reaching communities that we knew needed support, but we weren't able to do that with our existing partnership. And that's why we went and we sought specific partnership arrangements to help us to achieve that. So I would agree with Karen. I don't think it's about growth for the sake of it. I think it's back to what is it that you want to do, or have you identified a gap and a need? And then is growth required to be able to achieve that?
Yeah, thank you. Alastair, did you want to add anything to that? Or can I?
Yeah, possibly a kind of left field thought, really. Just with the kind of growth of tech and data, what social enterprises can do to prove their impact is becoming more and more critical, because then commissioners and policymakers can understand that by backing a social enterprise, they will save taxpayers' money in the long term in terms of issues of inclusion and reach and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I think both with things like the Social Value Act and things like new opportunities with big data and tech to prove our impact and to prove invest to save type arguments to the taxpayer, I think the future is rosy for scaling and growing social enterprises.
Thank you. So obviously that's music to my ears. Anything that's around measuring impact, I absolutely love it. So to hear you saying that is like, yes, let's have more of that. So I'm going to move on to another question, which links into what you've just mentioned, Alastair, around measuring impact, which is what are the best approaches to measuring growth? So I don't think it's necessarily just about impact, but you know, what are we actually measuring when we talk about growth? Perhaps is what we could explore within that question. So, Alastair, do you want to go first on that one?
I mean, obviously, it's the kind of usual thing with social enterprises that you've got this kind of dual measurement going on. You've got the mission side and two, the money side, and you've got to keep those in kilted and keep those in balance all the time. So it's it's tricky. I would keep a beady eye on the level of traded income, which ultimately is potentially your engine for growth, because any of the financial interventions you can take, such as any of the social investment offers or bonds or any enterprise grants or whatever, well, they're all pretty much dependent on the ability to pay them back in some way, shape, or form. And of course, the way of paying those back is really to have an engine of trading that means you can service the debt. So whatever way we look at it, we can't get away from the fact that we need to keep a beady eye on our ratio of trading to non-traded income and really try and maximize traded income, whether it's contracts, B2C income, B2B income, in order to de-risk our business model and prepare ourselves for growth. And when we get that to a more sustainable level, we can then access sources of growth finance, social investment, etc., in order to scale. And of course, with scale, I mean, for some of the people here at this conference, you must be so sick of living hand to mouth and struggling to keep your social enterprise alive. And scale does give it a de-risked element of safety. It does become easier if you have more sources of income and you are a bit more scaled. It feels less vulnerable and more sustainable. So yeah, so I would say that there's logic behind why scale is a certain degree of scale is a sensible strategic route to go down. I mean, apart from the impact, which is obviously the most important thing.
I think when we're looking at what we measure, I think we shouldn't just measure revenue or turnover. We have to know our costs. The most effective social entrepreneurs I've met are the ones who can tell me to the penny what things are costing them. And what I have learned is when people are simple and they're just coping and they're doing that cash-based trading where literally everything comes in, goes out, which is a normal startup phase, they often kind of discount their own time and energy and skills that they put into it, and they don't know that what the real cost is. And one of the things I do constantly is say, what is the real cost? The real cost means what is your time, because every time you as a founder spend something doing one thing, you're not doing something else. But also people often create these spreadsheets and forecasts that don't have time in it. So they go, well, I'm going to make 5 big sales to the corporate or to the local authority, and that'll cover all my costs. They don't take into account that it takes 6 to 9 months to make those sales. That's the cost of customer acquisition. So really, really understanding your numbers and really understanding where those numbers drive impact gives you the power to grow. It's not just knowing where your money comes from, it's knowing where it goes.
Can I just add to that? I think there's an added bit onto that is about understanding what parts of your service or are successful and which are not. So, you know, we've got a range of services, and it's important that we understand which parts of our services are successful, whether that be through customer satisfaction, but also in terms of income, and those that are not. And that was why kind of the point I was saying before about you know, social enterprises, we are businesses like anybody else. If you were a profit-making organisation, like a private sector organisation, and part of your organisation wasn't making any money, they would just stop doing it. It would be as simple as that. So I think it is really important that we operate in the same way, that we're able to understand what parts of our organisation, and that's why Karen is right, that the time bit is really important. So when we talk to commissioners, and you know, we put in time, and one of the things about public sector contracts, they're always a bit funny about, you know, the bit you put in around the management of a service. Management isn't free. It's your time. It's your time managing organisations, your time managing staff, and those things are really important. And so being able to argue that with the appropriate data and evidence to back that up is really, really important. But I think understanding the numbers, but understanding what parts of your services and businesses are successful with the data is also really important.
Yeah, thank you. That's great responses from all 3 of you. There's quite a few questions now, so I'm going to just give the next question to one of you to answer because I'm conscious of time. So the next question was, how important is collaboration for social enterprises to access business opportunities? Dionne, I was wondering if you could answer that, because obviously you've built a consortium and you've obviously had to collaborate quite a lot. So how important has that been for you?
It's been fundamental in terms of us being able to achieve what we've achieved. Firstly, in terms of the public sector contract itself. And I think the fact that we wouldn't have been able to achieve that, and certainly organisations within our consortium would not have been able to achieve that contract as individual organisations. The fact that we were able to come together and, in effect, through the contract, evidence our strengths and our reach was critical, really, for us winning that contract, in particular to the fact that we were also bidding against or tendering for that contract against national companies, so had that infrastructure and that. So it was really, really important. And I think it's also about the added value again, and I talked about this time and time again, it's where do these partners add value? So we don't just have partners or delivery partners within our consortium for the sake of it. They've got to tell us how they can add and bring that value. So I think it's a two-way thing. It's what they can bring to the party, so to speak, what they can bring to that contract, but equally what you can give to them. So we very much support our partners, our delivery partners. A lot of them are very small in size, and so we do provide them with some additional support, whether that be around information systems and just generally supporting them to be successful in their own right, as well as within our partnership arrangement.
Thank you. The next question I'm going to give to Alastair. I know this question is something that Karen spends a lot of time on in terms of good governance and boards, but there's another question specifically for you, Karen. So this one I'm going to send out to Alastair in terms of how important is a good board to supporting the growth of a social enterprise, and what can the challenges be? And this is also quite important for me personally, because I'm currently trying to recruit some non-execs to my board. So I'm aware of the challenges of that. But Alastair, I'd like to get your perspectives on this.
Oh, it's a huge question, Heidi. It's really complicated. I mean, in an answer, in a one-word answer, it's, you know, it's utterly critical to get your board right. And all of us who have boards know what it's like when that doesn't work out and when it doesn't go right. What I'd say is balance. I mean, kind of bleeding obvious, and sorry, apologies to people if I'm teaching you how to suck eggs, but I mean, it's balance, and I would say balance of the sectors. So, you know, there might be business people on your board, there might be people who come from the community, there might be people who come from kind of social enterprise background, there might be somebody who's kind of has the bookkeeper hat on and is over the books, there might be somebody who's a lawyer, etc. And I think it's incredibly important for you as a chief exec or leader to keep that in balance. And there's a healthy tension in that, you know, between mission and money, which you absolutely are designing into your board. And it means that every conversation is not going to be comfortable. It means that there is going to be conflict from time to time, differences of opinion. But to a certain extent, as a chief exec, if you can learn, I mean, I was reflecting the other day, I've done 20 years of being chief executive of the School for Social Entrepreneurs. That's 80 board meetings for a year, you know? And every so often, when they have differences of opinion with each other, you can kind of slightly rise above it and slightly hover out of it and listen to the debate. And you will find there's a happy kilter. You know, the good thing about a board, if you've got 10 odd people in, there's a kind of settling, balancing thing that happens where logic prevails and where it doesn't go in an extreme direction either way. But that's absolutely imperative that you've recruited to ensure balance and to ensure a good mix of skills and perspectives around your board, and diversity actually around your board, just to make sure that that's all balanced.
Thank you, Alastair. So the final question, which I'm going to give Karen, you've literally got about 30 seconds to answer this, is when you were talking, you mentioned about the different ways social enterprises can grow, so about deep growth and different things. So could you just expand on what those different types of growth are in 30 seconds?
Oh, they're different growth models. So of course, there's organic growth, which we all understand, which is you just do more of what you do. But you can be a consortium, replication, acquisition, joint venture, all of these. The key thing around understanding growth are two metrics: resources and control. And in the social enterprise space, often we want to put low resources in, so low time and low money, and then we have low control. So this is what happened in the early stage of replication, where people just share what they do because they're in the social space, so we'll just share. And they can even cannibalize their own model because they're just letting people take it. The key thing there is their impact is diluted, not the cannibalization of their model. If you want to keep your impact, you need to know really clearly against how much control you want over how something grows, and know that the more you want to control something, the more resources you have to put into to deliver that control. And it was all around impact.
Brilliant. Thank you, Karen, for that very quick summary there. So I just want to wrap up by thanking Alastair, Dionne and Karen for today's session. It's been brilliant to hear your different perspectives on growth and what is important, how we need to collaborate, building the trading and various other things there. So it's been really interesting. There are some other questions that maybe people can pick up with you directly in the networking session that's going to follow. I'm pretty sure that Sarah's about to pop in to introduce the fact that it's back to networking. But if she's not going to arrive, then yeah, here she is.
So thank you.
Lovely.
Thank you very much. That was an absolutely brilliant session. And I don't think we have these sessions about conversations about growth enough. And actually, I would love to have heard you all continue for at least another half an hour. So, but thank you very much for what information you've given us. And I'm hoping that people can follow up with you in the networking, which you're just about to go into. Please rejoin. You've got until 11:15 to have a break, network, make yourself a drink, refresh yourself. And you're going to hear about some social enterprises themselves and their stories of growth. And they're very broad ranging. And I know it's going to be yet another amazing session. So see you in the networking. Thank you, everybody.